All right. Good afternoon, everybody. If we could please take our seats, we will get started with the next session, which is going to be our ambassador's armchair discussion. Okay. At this time, I would like to call up on stage our moderator, Ambassador Derek Mitchell, you all met this morning, along with Ambassador John Negroponte, Ambassador MaryKay Carlson, and Ambassador Jose Manuel Romualdez.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I know folks are still eating, and that's great. And get up and keep getting food. But we want to start our lunch armchair discussion. We have a hard stop for Ambassador Carlson at 1:05, so we have just about 1 hour for this session, and we are extraordinarily privileged to have the three ambassadors that are sitting to my left up here and sitting to my right, or as you face me. They really deserve extensive introductions or no introduction, depending on how you view it. But let me just say, very briefly, introduce each of them. Ambassador Negroponte, I think, is probably known to all of you. These days, he is vice chairman at McClarty Associates, but he had nearly a 5-decade career in the U.S. government at the nexus of diplomacy and national security. He was on the U.S. National Security Council twice, including as the Deputy National Security Advisor under President Reagan. He was the first Director of National Intelligence under President George W. Bush, and he finished his career as a Deputy Secretary of State. You don't get a more distinguished career than Ambassador John Negroponte, but I'm sure he will say that among all of his assignments, he is most proud to be ambassador to the Philippines, among other countries. So we are pleased. He's also, as you know, co-chair of the U.S.-Philippine Society, so he keeps his connections to this country. To his left, we have the current U.S. ambassador, the Philippine ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Romualdez, who was appointed by President Duterte in 2017 and reappointed by President Marcos to that position. That is fairly rare in the U.S. system. I don't know how it is in the Philippine system, but speaks to his qualities quite highly. He has extensive background in Philippine media as a business executive, and President Duterte conferred on him the Order of the Sikatuna in 2021, one of the 3 highest honors of the Republic, which he received for his exceptional and meritorious contributions to strengthening and deepening the Philippine-U.S. alliance relationship. And to his left is Ambassador MaryKay Carlson, who was nominated to become ambassador in February of 2022 and became the ambassador was confirmed in May of the same year. She's a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, someone who for 4 decades has had a distinguished career as a Foreign Service officer, serving in diplomatic missions in China twice, Ukraine, Hong Kong, Mozambique, Kenya, and the Dominican Republic. So just very briefly, the backgrounds of the 3 next to me, and we'll get to questions. What we'll do is we'll do 30 minutes, I will ask questions, and we will open it up to the crowd to answer, to the audience to ask what you want to ask these 3 distinguished individuals. First, I want to ask Ambassador Negroponte. We all know that the U.S.-Philippine alliance in recent years has gone through a tremendous period of modernization and development. It's really been revitalized, and I think really it's reflected in this conference itself. You have served here. You served here in Manila in the late 1990s when the alliance was in a different place. I was in the Pentagon at that same time watching it. And you helped push for a deeper partnership in the years since, including through the U.S.-Philippine Society. I'd like to ask you how you would observe the evolution in the relationship since the 1990s, and what your hopes are, what your vision is for the years ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you to CSIS and to Greg Poling for having organized this excellent conference. Very much appreciate that, and really impressed by the large group of people that have managed to assemble here for our discussion. I arrived in the Philippines, our family arrived in late 1993, which was somewhat of a low point in the area of strategic cooperation between our two countries. The last vessel had weighed anchor from Subic Bay about a year earlier, and the prospects for any kind of strategic cooperation with the Philippines were considerably lower, I should say, than they had been before, and also than they are now. And what I think we've seen in the past years since that time, almost, 3 decades, is that a gradual evolution back towards a closer strategic cooperation between the two countries, first with a visiting forces agreement, then an enhanced defense cooperation agreement, and now we're at a point where you could say that the cooperation between the two of our countries is quite robust, although it's not back to the point of having bases, which we pulled out of back in 1992 or 93, and which I doubt will ever go back to that kind of situation. I don't think that's in the vocabulary of the strategic relationship between the two countries, but we have, I think, come a long, long ways in terms of restoring the level of strategic cooperation and trust that had existed previously between the two countries, and I think now exists once again. So I'm optimistic for our cooperation in this part of the world. I think that it makes all the sense in the world for us and the Philippines and other countries in the region to work together as well as we can to provide the kind of strategic stability that is desired so that this country and others can prosper under free and democratic circumstances. So I think we're back pretty much to where we were prior to 1992.
Yeah, and I remember those days very well, the 90s, as I mentioned. I was working the Southeast, we call it the PIMS account, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, in those days. And there was a real, of course, in the 90s, still very raw, the feelings in the Philippines, but there was definitely a desire in the Pentagon to get back here. And it was a matter of patience. We had to rebuild that trust, allow the Philippines to stand on its own, come back at the right time. And I'd like to sort of ask now of the two ambassadors a very similar question, maybe from your individual perspectives, given that you are now on the ground at really this remarkable point of revitalization after some decades. It never was a cold relationship, but it's now revitalized in a really profound way. How you observe that? What are the markers of that? I mean, what do you see as the most important developments that have occurred in recent years? And how do you account for that progress, say in the past 5 to 10 years? And maybe Ambassador Romualdez and the same to Ambassador Carlson.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Greg Poling of CSIS for organizing such a, I'm quite impressed with the number of people that you have here present today. And I would like to thank also, of course, Mr. Hendrickson, who was very kind to and generous enough to host this event, which I think is very important for our relationship. Well, I think our relationship with the United States has continued to evolve, and in my view, since I've been in Washington for 8 years now, I think from where we were in 2017 or 18, I think 2017 is when I first arrived in Washington, and there were quite a number of challenges that we had, but because of the relationship that we've been able to establish between our two presidents, with President Trump at that time and President Duterte, I think that relationship remains stable and strong. And we've seen it evolve into a better relationship that we have today under President Marcos. President Marcos has been to the United States 5 times. He is going again in a couple of weeks to attend the United Nations General Assembly. And all of these trips to the United States has always proved to be continuing to increase and sustain the relationship and make it even stronger. His recent visit to Washington, D.C., upon the invitation of President Trump, is an indication of how important the relationship was. And not only that, I think they've been able to establish a very good relationship between the two presidents. And so I see it that the future of our relationship will continue to be strong and very much stable and sustainable. And I think also, not only on the alliance side of it, but more importantly, on the economic front. There is a lot of movement in that sector, and I think that we will be able to see more of these types of investments coming not only from the private sector in the United States, but also from the United States government as well. As you know, the Luzon Economic Corridor has been established, and that it is recently Secretary Marco Rubio announced the funding of this corridor, which is going to be a very big investment that will attract more investments from other countries as well. So all in all, I think our relationship over the past 8 years has been very good. And of course, it's always great to have a great partner like Ambassador MaryKay, who has not only done a fantastic job, but I don't know what else to describe what MaryKay has done for this relationship. And I'm very lucky to have her as part of my partnership. Thank you.
Okay, I guess that's my cue to slip you your payment now, babe. Thank you very much for that. I will say that in the 3 years plus, 3 years now and 2 months that I've been here, this truly has been a bilateral relationship on hyperdrive, a term that was first coined by Assistant Secretary J.V. Chan Gonzaga, but has been reiterated many times, including by our own Secretary of State. And we've seen progress, as Babe has said, across virtually every sector. But I would say in particular, on defense and security, the change has been dramatic. When I first got here, that we were coming out of a period, of course, where relations had been tamped down by the pandemic, but also a period where we saw the potential for the visiting forces agreement it was hanging on by a thread. So when President Marcos took over, I arrived a few weeks after that, we've seen an upward trajectory that has been, faster, stronger, better, more with each passing day. And we've seen that as evidence, as Babe just said, with a number of visits, including the most recent visit to Washington, with President Marcos being the only ASEAN leader certainly the first, and I think so far only, to be invited to the White House under this administration. So it really shows the very strong bipartisan support that this relationship enjoys in Washington. But getting back to 3 years ago, as we were all taking off our masks and face shields and getting down to work, getting back into the office, no one talked about maritime cooperative activities. We did not have a GSOMIA agreement to govern the exchange of military information. We did not have a well-oiled machine in terms of coordinating among our militaries for ISR support for our critical missions out into the South China Sea. We did have very strong relations on a mill level, but not at the level that we've seen the dramatic growth in over the last 3 years. So I had the pleasure of attending the most recent MDB-SEB, that Mutual Defense Board bilateral engagement, engagement board with the military in Indo-PACOM, where we set forth the agenda for our military engagements. And there are over 500 annually, from the large-scale Balakatan exercises to, as I mentioned, the maritime cooperative activities bilaterally and now multilaterally. And I see a number of our very strong partners in the form of my colleagues here in the embassy, in their respective embassies here in this room, who are coordinating with us as the Philippines expands its relations with their military partners. So I've rattled on, but I do also want to mention the Luzon Economic Corridor as a key component of our very strong economic ties. We are partners in prosperity as well as ironclad allies, and all of that is underpinned by very strong and enduring people-to-people ties. The over 4 million Filipino Americans, Filipinos and Filipino Americans in the United States, and 750,000 Americans living here, more than in Japan and Korea combined, two of our other close allies in this region. And then just to pick up on what Ambassador Negroponte said about strategic cooperation and trust. All of the achievements that we have made and the advancements on hyperdrive over the course of the past 3 years that I've had experience in, it's because we've been able to establish and build trust. And I think that is a key word that Ambassador Negroponte mentioned, was trust, building the trust between our two peoples.
Yeah, there was just two points that I failed to mention that I'd like to just highlight in the relationship, and which I think has been very important. First is the initiative that the Philippine government took to challenge China's law of the sea position and its 9-dash line and its exaggerated claims to maritime jurisdiction here in the South China Sea. And I think the fact that the government of the Philippines took that on was, I think, a very forceful and courageous act on the part of, I believe it was in the Duterte administration, or was it just before? But in any event, the fact that they took it on and they won the UN arbitral court decision in favor of the Philippine government position and against China, even though it's not something that can be enforced automatically, it still has the international community on record as saying that China's position is wrong, it's not legal, it's not consistent with international law. And then the companion piece of that I would say is the fact that Secretary of State Pompeo in 2019 said that any attack against Philippine vessels in this region would be considered as an act that would bring into play our mutual defense responsibilities. So I think those were two very important developments.
Very important contribution there. Ambassador Carlson mentioned economics and people-to-people ties as very fundamental to the foundations of the relationship, in addition, of course, to the security issues, which are absolutely essential. But let me ask Ambassador Romualdez, issue of the economics. Philippines is the second fastest growing economy in the region. The United States FDI here is growing quite rapidly. I wonder what you can say about the trend lines in the economic partnership. You mentioned the Luzon Economic Corridor and things like that, but there are other aspects of the economic partnership that you may want to highlight between the United States and the Philippines these days that you're witnessing.
I think there are quite a number of sectors that we're really very much invested in, and also trying to get some investments coming from the United States, and that's first and foremost the energy sector. This is very important for this administration. President Marcos had made it clear that he wants to bring down the cost of energy in this country to be able to lure more investments to come into the Philippines. And so we were able to have that 1, 2, 3 agreement on the nuclear power as a first step. This was done, of course, during the time of President Biden. And we are pushing on having investments coming in. There are quite a number of companies that are interested in doing some partnerships with us here. And the other one, of course, is the digital infrastructure, which is, again, another important part of President Marcos's economic program. These two alone definitely is an important part of our relationship between our two countries, and the fact that we have a lot of interest coming from not only from the private sector, but there is a push coming even from the government of the United States, and I think that's an indication that the economic part of our relationship is just as important as our defense alliance with the United States.
On the people-to-people side, Ambassador Negroponte, the U.S.-Philippine Society is one of the leading edges of that. We have deep resonance, obviously, the Filipino-American community, that those ties are just really very deep for decades. I'd like to ask you, though, are we making the most of this? Do you think there's much more we can do with those connections to develop the foundations of the relationship for times that may come where the foundations are rocked by winds one way or the other? Is there more in that regard? And maybe related to that, we talked a little bit this morning, we mentioned briefly the idea of soft power. And we've kind of eviscerated, I won't speak for Ambassador Carlson on this, or just say from observation, that because of the USAID has been eviscerated, that it's affected some of these foundational relations that we've had on the soft power element. How would you comment on that from your perspective, both as a former ambassador, policymaker, and the chair of the U.S.-Philippine Society?
Well, first of all, obviously, people-to-people relations are extremely important. But one of the important things to remember about people-to-people relations, especially in the case of the United States and a country like the Philippines, where the population of Philippine Americans has increased by about 1 million people every decade for the last 3 decades. There are now 4.5 million or so Filipino Americans in the United States. And the truth of the matter is, you don't know what's going on between the Philippine American community and the people out here in terms of all the exchanges and all the transactions that are happening, private business, family relationships, and so forth. So you only have you sort of have a view of the tip of the iceberg. But yes, it's something that we certainly ought to tap into, and that's one of the intentions of the United States Philippine Society. And yet, could we do more? Of course. It requires a certain amount of resources, but I think it also has to be something that comes from within these communities themselves, and they've got to realize the potential and try to realize the potential that their presence in the United States represents for the relationship between our two countries. The U.S.-Philippine Society was formed back in 2011 during the time of President Aquino. He inaugurated our first meeting. We're not a large organization, but we try to tap into this energy that exists between the two countries. And we have annual meetings that take place, and we mount a certain number of programs every year. We played an active role during some of the humanitarian disasters that occurred over the past decade or so. The Hurricane Haiyan, for example, we were very instrumental in providing some prompt relief to that. The situation in Marawi and its humanitarian consequences. So yeah, we're there, we're alert to opportunities, but we have to try to tap into the different resources that we have been able to identify who could be of some support and assistance. Now, you mentioned the loss of other soft power tools like the reduction of AID and of AIDS and so forth. That's a serious matter, but it's a broader policy matter affecting the United States government as a whole. And of course, I for one think it's a serious mistake, just like I think it's a mistake for the people in Washington to want to cut back so dramatically the funding of the United Nations and all the important humanitarian agencies that they have that can be of assistance to countries around the world, such as the UNHCR, UNICEF, UNDP, and so forth. So, yeah, that's a big topic, and I'm not sure we're going to see much progress on that front from the current United States government.
May I just add, babe, that when President Marcos was in Washington recently, there was an announcement made by the State Department, subject to congressional approval, of $63 million in new foreign assistance specifically for the Philippines, focused on maritime and on energy and dedicated to the development of the Luzon Economic Corridor. That was the first announcement under the Trump administration of any foreign assistance to any country. So I think foreign assistance will continue in the Philippines. The U.S. Embassy here has one of the few, I think just here and in Thailand in this region, have full foreign affairs sections, much smaller than under USAID, but nevertheless a dedicated team within the U.S. Embassy focused on the Philippines. I would also note that after the recent flooding and typhoons in July, the U.S. committed $500,000 in immediate emergency relief, and Indo-PACOM sent the Ospreys as well as other dedicated airlift capability to assist. And of course, our U.S. Companies, through the American Chamber of Commerce and U.S. ASEAN Business Council and others, have invested a lot, not only in their commercial and business activities, but also in corporate social responsibility activities. So I was able to participate in awarding, giving awards to, at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the first ever awards recognizing the many contributions that our U.S. companies make throughout the Philippines to helping develop their communities where they work throughout the Philippines. So those are some of the activities. So I think when you look at just one aspect of foreign assistance, that's only one small aspect. We also have a very vibrant Peace Corps here, the oldest Fulbright Foundation, a lot of public diplomacy programs and sponsorships, the International Visitor Leadership Program. So I just want to underscore that our vibrant activities continue across many sectors.
I should have mentioned that the U.S.-Philippine Society is an entirely binational institution. It's both Filipino and United States. And I'm the U.S. co-chair. The other co-chair is in this room, Jaime Sobel de Ayala, who's a great partner in this enterprise. And we work together very, very closely.
But just to add to the people-to-people ties, I can tell you with my experience that the people-to-people ties have made it so much easier for me to do my work in the United States, mainly because we have a Filipino-American in every state in the United States. I went to Alaska not too long ago, and as far as Juneau, one of the coldest places in Alaska, we have Filipinos there. And I can tell you that really helped a lot because my relationship with Senator Dan Sullivan has developed into to where it is today because of the Filipino community. And again, just to add to that, I still have about 40 more states to go. I don't know if I'm going to be able to go to them. I only went to 10. But the people-to-people ties has really helped the relationship to be where we are today. In fact, when I was in Mar-a-Lago, I asked President Trump that he had a very good professional caddy with him, and I said, how many you have a Filipino caddy? And he says, I've got 4. I said, well, we probably will send you some more if you want. But that's just an indication that kind of relationship has really helped a lot. And in fact, in the U.S. Congress, Senator Haggerty's chief of staff is a Filipino American. All of these things add to that relationship that we have. And one last point is that just to show you, Our Filipino nurses and our doctors, of course, are one of the best. We have an American company that is going to be investing $500 million here in the Philippines to put up a state-of-the-art hospital, and it's already at the third stage of this investment talks that we're having with this American company. Again, that is because of the strong people-to-people, the kind of image that the Filipino-American community has in the United States.
I was just going to add that Tagalog is now the fourth most spoken language in the United States after English, Spanish, and Chinese. So it's a very vibrant community. There was a report that just came out on immigrant communities in the United States, and the Philippine immigrant community tends to have a higher average age and a higher percentage who are U.S. citizens, and also a higher percentage with university degrees. And also the Americans coming to the Philippines are increasing. Those that are retiring here, making the Philippines their home, not just retiring, but also working here long term. We're seeing those numbers grow up as well. So that those people-to-people ties that have always been the base of our relations are increasingly becoming a springboard for what we can do together in the future.
I think those are all very important things to keep in mind. If there's nervousness here about the state of the relationship or where things are going with the new administration that can seem mercurial in Washington, there is still a lot that is ongoing, and the Philippines is getting a great deal of attention. I mean, also, I marked down here that Philippines was the first to have its foreign military financing unfrozen. You know, Marcos was the first to come from Southeast Asia to the Oval Office. There are a lot of ways there is continuity and attention. You know, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, whatever we're calling him now, came here in his first visit. So there's a lot of, even with other things at sort of wobbly, I can say you just never know what side of the bed our president may wake up on, but the initial kind of sounding seemed to be somewhat continuous. And that's encouraging, but please go ahead.
May I also just add that in the month of August alone, when our congressional recess was taking place, we had 10 different congressional delegations visit. 3 that were headed by senatorial leaders, and then 7 that were congressional staffers. And if the staff delegations, as we call them, are sometimes even more important than the Senate delegations, because some senators run their staffs and some staffs run their senators. I'm sure that's the case in other places. So to have 10 different bipartisan congressional delegations out here in the month of August alone demonstrates that very strong bipartisan support and the interest and attention that the Philippines is receiving in Washington.
So we're at that point of turning this to the audience for questions, and I like to do that. And I could always see people in front of me. I will turn to you, sir, but I want to be looking far in corners, which we never get to see. But first, go ahead, sir. Is there a microphone for the gentleman? Yeah? Right there. Yes.
I wear 2 hats. I'm an academic in De La Salle University, and I'm a convener of national security in Stratbase. I'm Professor Renato Cruz de Castro. We have to admit that the relationship is close, especially because of the fact that any alliance becomes closer if you're confronted with a challenge, with a threat. And of course, that's obviously China in the South China Sea, but we are also facing another major flashpoint, and I consider it the quintessential flashpoint in the region, and that is Taiwan. So of course, everyone knows of what they call the Davidson window, that China would effect an armed invasion of Taiwan by 2027. And of course, we are very close to Taiwan, and of course, the Philippines is, of course, a treaty ally of the United States. How can we basically reconfigure the alliance to address 2 security challenges, of course, emanating from China, one in the South China Sea, and the other one, which I consider is a more dangerous one, is of course China's plan for Taiwan in 2027.
Who wants to take on that challenge of Taiwan?
Well, yeah, but I count on some help also.
Touchy question for the officials.
But I think, first of all, we have to continue the policy of deterrence that we're currently pursuing. After all, that's what we've been doing. We've been trying to deter aggressive behavior by China through the various steps that we've taken, the assurances we've given, and so forth. I mean, I think that's the underlying strategy. As far as the situation vis-a-vis Taiwan is concerned, my view is that in recent years, I don't think there's ever been a time where there's been as much support within the United States body politic, and particularly in our Congress, for coming to the assistance of Taiwan, coming to the defense of Taiwan, should it be attacked by China. I think that's much stronger. The policy of strategic ambiguity, and you remember how Mr. Biden, every time they asked the American spokespeople, they'd say, well, that we believe in strategic ambiguity, but every time they asked Mr. Biden, would we come to Taiwan's assistance, he'd say, of course. and he said it on repeated occasions. And I think that's where the mindset is of the people in the United States Congress. Well, I think you have to continue to take that kind of strong posture vis-a-vis a potential Chinese attack against Taiwan itself. And of course, if China were to ever take Taiwan by force, succeed in doing it, it would present the Philippines with an even greater problem, because you could then see mainland China from Batanes. I mean, the two pieces of land are almost visible to each other. So obviously the Philippines has a great interest in that question, in addition to the situation in the South China Sea.
Well, our main interest, of course, in Taiwan is the fact that we have over 200,000 Filipino workers. And so that is a major concern that the Marcos administration has always been looking into. And that's probably the issue that will bring us to having to work with the United States in terms of being able to bring back those 200,000 plus workers that we have. But all indications are showing that I think right now, in our view, China is not ready to do what it planned to do in 2027. But nonetheless, there is always the danger that they may find other ways to be able to sort of like strangulate, perhaps by a blockade or whatever it is. And so we're working, of course, with our other partners in the area, Japan most specifically, and we continue to work with them on many aspects of our military relationship. But like I said, the only reason why the main reason why we may get involved in some way or the other is because of the 200,000 workers that we have in Taiwan.
I would just add that I think when defense and security analysts from the United States look at the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty and China, they have tended to view this relationship, the MDT, primarily through the lens of a Taiwan contingency, whereas defense and security folks based in the Philippines looking at the Mutual Defense Treaty over time have primarily viewed the MDT through the lens of a South China Sea or West Philippine Sea contingency. And the point that I have been making over the course of my tenure here to folks, especially who are coming from Washington and visiting the Philippines or trying to understand the state of our bilateral relationship and the challenges in this region, I've been saying we need graduated lenses. We need to be able to see the Mutual Defense Treaty both through the lens of the South China Sea and through the lens of a Taiwan contingency, because quite frankly, they're connected. And our analysts tell us that if mainland China feels like they have the South China Sea locked down, then that makes a Taiwan contingency or an invasion that much more likely. And so we want to make sure that we, again, continue to build on that trust, to be able to have those graduated lenses so that we understand very clearly how both sides of our mutual defense treaty, our bilateral mutual defense treaty, how we're viewing the situation, and that we're then looping in our partners, our like-minded partners and other allies, so that we look at this region as one theater of operation, not separating out one issue area or the other issue area.
Important. And so we'll add even the East China Sea, the Japan, it's all straight down, first island chain, the Maritime, one theater in essence in Asia. It's very important. Question, sir, way over there. Closest to the buffet. There you go.
My name is Steve Cutler. I've learned a lot from this panel and the earlier panel. I appreciate the opportunity to hear you. We hear a lot of comments from media about reshoring manufacturing jobs. Is there a plan, is there a thought? I'd like to hear your opinions on friend-shoring of data-related or information jobs, such as with the BPOs on which the Philippines heavily relies for employment now. Not so much the manufacturing, but data-related and information-related jobs, if you could, please. Thank you.
The data-related information, John? What was the last part you said?
Data and information-related
Data
jobs, the information processing.
It's about reshoring, friendshoring. Where does that stand?
Well, I think on the friendshoring of, well, manufacturing is what we're looking at, and this is mostly on defense manufacturing. We have been in discussions with a number of defense companies in the United States that may want to do some joint venture here in the Philippines. In fact, there is a recent NDAA that you're familiar with, this thing with Congressman Zinke, who was the one who actually inserted this in the NDAA, where the manufacture of ammunition, for instance, is being discussed. And in fact, it was discussed during the visit of President Marcos at the Oval Office. So that's one. And we have many others along those lines on the defense side, which is a good example of how we can have both defense and economic partnership with the United States, like what we have right now with Subic, with Cerberus, where we have a private entity that has invested in Subic for the repair and perhaps even to build some ships. We're looking at working with them, with the United States, because the United States Navy now wants to build more ships, and we are offering the Subic facility as one area where we could probably contribute to that, and then that obviously creates jobs. This is the kind of formula that we're quite interested in having here in the Philippines, both economic and defense cooperation.
I would just add that we have great trilateral cooperation in the Luzon Economic Corridor with Japan, in Subic just recently with the Republic of Korea. A U.S. Cerberus company has invested in Subic Aguila, and now Hyundai has initiated shipbuilding, brought that back to Subic. So that's another example of trilateral cooperation. Taiwan had a large trade delegation here just recently, and specifically to your question about data centers and data processing, Taiwan is looking to invest with U.S. companies, Taiwan companies, and looking at opportunities here in the Philippines, especially in northern Luzon, but including in Subic and Clark, about opportunities that we might be able to coordinate together on. With regard to the business process outsourcing sector now, Concentrix, a U.S. company, is the largest single foreign employer in the Philippines. So the BPO sector is already very large. I think the biggest question, and one to which I certainly do not have an answer, is what AI is going to bring in this whole sector. So that's why we want to continue working with our partners trilaterally, bilaterally, multilaterally through the Luzon Economic Corridor and other areas to diversify our investments here in the Philippines.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ambassador. I'm Erica from Business World. I'm a reporter. So in April, the U.S. government approved the possible sale of 20 F-16 fighter jets to the Philippines, and a deal valued at about $5.5 billion. So now, could you give us an update on the status of its acquisition and what the next steps are in the process? Thank you.
I don't have any information to offer on acquisitions of, I believe you said multi-role fighters by the part of the Philippines. I don't have anything for you on that.
Well, the last I heard, it's been on hold, mainly because of funding, which is obviously important to be able to proceed with that purchase of these. I assume you're referring to the F-16s that's been offered to the Philippines. So we're still in discussion as far as that's concerned, but at the end of the day, it all boils down to the money, the availability of the funds. And I think at this point in time, the armed forces, I have our friends here from the AFP, they have other priorities which they feel is much more important at this time rather than the purchase of the F-16s.
Since I don't think there's going to be a question on this subject, I just would like to briefly mention the question of free trade. I think it's been a long-term ambition of our two countries to eventually have some kind of free trade arrangement, and I think it would be very fitting in terms of the alliance relationship, among other factors. And I think it would be one way of working our way through this question of quite unusually high tariffs being imposed on Philippine products that go into the United States. So I hope that what was agreed or the set during President Marcos's recent meetings back in Washington is not going to be the last word on the level of United States tariffs, and hope there'll be flexibility going forward and into the future with respect to those levels, which I would hope would eventually go down.
Well, I can say that definitely that's not, the current tariff is not written in stone. No, it's not the last word. We're continuing to work with the Commerce Department and specifically with the USTR on, it's more of really finding exemptions that I think that the U.S. Commerce and the USTR is now under consideration. But we're very confident that at the end of the day, we will be able to get what we feel would be a fair tariff. But talking about the free trade, we actually mentioned this to Ambassador Jameson Greer when we had a meeting with him, with Secretary Go and Secretary Roque. And we said, I know that the FTA is out of the table, and he said, no, we're ready, we're going to consider it. So in other words, this administration, the Trump administration, is not closing the door on the FTA. So who knows? We might be able to work something out down the road, perhaps after the midterm elections in the United States.
Very good. Someone way over in the corner there, I saw. Back there you go. Microphone. I know.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, and to the CSIS, congratulations to everybody. This is a fantastic forum. I know we're pressed for time, so my question is very brief. I'm coming from the CSO sector, so civil society, and my interest is on the topic that you've been discussing repeatedly already this morning on people-to-people relations, and soft power. So this is a very interesting topic for civil society in particular. For the purpose of this forum, though, I would like to know what would as advice perhaps, what would you say would be the best, greatest role of the civil society to help the Philippines grow our economic complexity? Because as far as I understand, I know we take pride in our OFWs, and hands down to all of them, but I really believe that to strengthen our economy, we have to also strengthen our local workforce, and there's a lot of cooperation between the US and the Philippines at the moment, growing our industries, including shipbuilding, defense, but how would CSOs have an influence or impact on these efforts? Thank you.
Comment?
Well, I would say that in my tenure here, I've been very impressed by the Philippine civil society organizations. It's actually quite overwhelming to see how Filipinos come together in times of adversity to help each other out in their communities. And I would say with 40 years in government, I've never worked in the private sector. I've never been a leader in a civil society organization. But I would say the key challenge would be scaling and seeking sustainability. And I know that a number of Philippine corporations have been working through their corporate social responsibility efforts to take these grassroots organizations and see how they can make them sustainable and scale them up. I don't have a magic wand to fix anything or to create that, but I think it just takes sustained effort over time. And I do think that a number of U.S. organizations can assist. We have the opportunity for various exchanges, whether it's through our IVLP program, our International Visitor Leadership Program, or through some of our scholarship programs to target civil society leaders and organizers. Let me also mention an organization, YSEALI, the Young Southeast Asia Leadership Initiative. I don't know how many times I have gone to a pop-up market or some other area where I've seen a young entrepreneur who is taking usually some sort of recycled material, turning it into something that I want to buy, and saying, you know, I learned about this through the YSEALI program. So there are any number of ways through people-to-people exchanges between Americans and Filipinos that we can help engender the sort of, or to give even more life to the creativity that already exists here. But the question is one of upscaling that and sustaining it, and that's a real challenge.
There's a woman way in the corner here we preempted, please.
Hello. Good afternoon. As an independent, albeit curious body from the outside looking in, I'd just like to inquire, in view of the United States' recent focus on stricter immigration policies and deportations, how might these developments have influenced its bilateral relationships with the Philippines, if any, particularly in light of the large Filipino community within the United States? Thank you so much.
Well, I just referenced the study on immigrant communities in the United States that noted that Filipinos the average age tends to be higher, their education level tends to be higher, and the percentage of the Philippine immigrants to the United States who become U.S. citizens is higher considerably than other immigrant groups. I know that there have been some issues in the press here, in particular related to seafarers who have been denied entry into the United States. But it's important to note that every country is charged with protecting its borders. The Philippines does the same thing. I just got a letter yesterday from someone who was denied entry, an American citizen, 76-year-old veteran, was denied entry into the Philippines and turned around and sent back to New York on PAL. These things happen. Every country must ensure the border security, and the Trump administration has made very clear that if you violate our laws, and if you do not comply with the terms of your visa, then you will be expelled. So it's not targeted against Filipinos. We know that, we see it across the board. And it's, I think, just very important to recognize that this is something that all countries are charged with, maintaining the safety and security of their people through maintaining border security.
Well, just to add to that, I think we had a meeting with the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and they indicated to us that the Philippines or Filipinos that are up for deportation, they would definitely, we made it clear that we do not want them to be sent to a third country, no matter what crime they have committed. As long as they're Filipino citizens, we will accept them here in the Philippines, and we will deal with whatever crime they have committed in the United States. But more importantly, I think, is the fact that the Department of Homeland Security has made it clear also to us in Washington that if there is, they have a serious offer to any Filipino that will voluntarily self-deport, and they're prepared to give them $1,000 and a ticket to go back. From what I'm told, while this is an offer that's made to most citizens who are staying in the United States illegally, I think they're very specific about the Philippines. And this is an offer that's made. And I think that's born of the fact that, again, it's because of the relationship that we have and the kind of image that the Filipinos have in the United States. We're by far definitely not criminals, and we're good workers. But I've always told our Filipinos who are staying in the United States and their visas have expired or they don't have the right documents, that it's best for them to self-deport. Because once you have been deported, it's almost 101% sure that you will never be able to go back to the United States. So, and I agree with Master MaryKay that we're doing the same thing here right now. We had a meeting with the Bureau of Immigration recently, and we're going all out into trying to get rid of a lot of aliens that are here in the Philippines illegally or with fake passports or with fake visas.
Or for anyone who would seek to do harm to the Philippines, the people of the Philippines or the people of the United States. Let me add that our law enforcement agencies cooperate fully, whether it's on human trafficking or abuse of children. Any number of drug enforcement agencies on both sides work closely together. So our law enforcement agencies work closely together to ensure that we keep the protection of our citizens at the forefront.
Great. Well, I had two jobs. One was to ask questions. Another is to get Ambassador Carlson out at the 1:05 hard deadline. Do you have time for one more quick question? You do? Okay, we'll just take one more very quick question, and then we'll wrap up.
Very quick. So, sir, your military attaché at your embassy in D.C., they're incredible, very energetic, and they're driving projects like MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul. We're sitting in one of the greatest mariner nations on the face of the earth, and you guys can do this not just in Subic, but in Cebu, Mindanao. You have that capability, and it would be a great way, one, to deter that potential adversary because we'd have visibility of U.S. ships here, and we stimulate the Filipino economy by bringing good jobs to the shipyards. And so this is really for the Americans. How can we accelerate that capability? Because it seems to be, the roadblock by, oh, we can't do this because of this. We can't do this because of that. And how do we accelerate that to take advantage of the skill set here, reduce our travel time, our expense, create that visibility that ends up deterring a potential adversary in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea, and then it also extends our supply chain throughout the islands, which we're going to need anyways if there is a potential conflict that actually occurs. Any ideas?
I don't have any ideas, but I think what I would say to your question is yes. I mean, this is something definitely worth looking into if it isn't already being done. But how do we maximize these opportunities? Indeed. And I think what happened with Cerberus and investing in Subic Bay was a very good starting point. But if that can be expanded upon, well, all the better.
Well, I would advise you to go to the top man as far as our economic investments are concerned, and that's Secretary Frederick Go. And I can tell you that, without, pardon the pun, but he's the go-to. So he can make things happen, and we've worked with him on many occasions on some of the things that we needed to do. I called him up from Washington, and he immediately had it done in less than 24, maybe 48 hours at the most, especially in some things that were very important for getting investors to come into the Philippines. So any type of opportunities like this can be coursed through his office, and of course it'll work through our National Security Advisor's office also when it comes to, as far as the defense side of things, and members of our armed forces, the AFP, can also look into it. But that is, as Ambassador Negroponte said, something that we really are encouraging is the defense and economic combination of those two in bringing in investments, because we are at that point that I think that this is really an industry that will grow here in the Philippines, most specifically, just like what's happening right now in Ukraine. There are quite a number of companies that are doing a lot of stuff. In fact, we have inquiries coming from Ukraine. They're developing their own defense industry. And we are also talking to them and seeing how we can work with them on some of these things.
And I would just add that we in the U.S. Embassy here in Manila are very enthusiastic about this opportunity. I've already mentioned the 10 different congressional delegations that were here in August. At least half of them went to Subic specifically to lay eyes on the issues. And I think when you can help educate Washington policymakers and visitors, Secretary Hegseth made his, as we heard earlier, Secretary Hegseth's very first visit to the region was right here to the Philippines. So I think the more people that interact with the government here, that see what's going on, the more enthusiasm that we have. And I think some of these roadblocks that are just inherent in our system will start to fall away as people learn more about what the opportunities are here.
Well, let me end there. Thank you very much to the panel, of course. Please join me in a round of applause for a remarkable panel. Thank you. And fantastic questions. It really gives a sense of the richness, robustness of not just the challenges, but enormous opportunities that exist in this relationship. So we will take a break now. We'll let Ambassador Carlson get out to her next meeting quickly, and we'll start up again when? 15 minutes.
Hello? All right. Welcome back, everybody. I apologize to cut short the networking, but if we could all find our seats, we'll get started with our next panel. Thank you very much. So we are going to start with our second panel discussion of the day. Please let me call up Harrison Prétat, who is a fellow and deputy director of the Asian Maritime Transparency Initiative at CSIS, who will be moderating our panel on building 21st century infrastructure. And if I could ask all of our panelists to come up and take their seats, we will get started. Thank you very much.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Oh, welcome back. We're here for building 21st century infrastructure. I'm Harrison Prétat, as Greg mentioned. I'm the Deputy Director and Fellow of the Asian Maritime Transparency Initiative at CSIS. And I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted that you can all make it. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce our illustrious speakers here. To my left is Conor Savoy. Conor is a non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development. Conor served in multiple roles at USAID, most recently having been the team lead for foreign policy engagement, and prior to that serving as a senior policy advisor in the Office of Development Cooperation. Before working at USAID, Conor was with CSIS at our own Project on Prosperity and Development. To his left is Hank Hendrickson. Hank helped launch the U.S.-Philippine Society in Washington, D.C. in 2012 and continues to serve as its executive director. Hank, before that, was a career Foreign Service officer, and he served in postings across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, including 2 postings in the Philippines. To his left is Adoracion Navarro. Dr. Navarro is a senior fellow at the Philippine Institute of Development Studies. She formerly served as the Undersecretary for Regional Development at the National Economic and Development Authority here in the Philippines. And last but certainly not least is Victor Dindo Manhit. Dindo is the founder and president of the Stratbase Group and the Stratbase ADR Institute here in Manila. He's also the Philippine country head of Bauer Group Asia and serves as the chair of the Strategic Communications and Cybersecurity Committee of the Armed Forces of the Philippines Multi-Sector Governance Council. Before I toss it over to our panelists, I did want to just give kind of some of the big questions that we're trying to look at in this discussion of infrastructure in the context of strategy. And so the first and overarching question are, what are the opportunities for greater cooperation on infrastructure development between the United States and the Philippines? And the second question, kind of following under that, is given the changes in the United States in the past 8 months or so, and especially given the changes to USAID and other traditional forms of development assistance, what does the future of development assistance look like for the United States, and particularly with regard to its cooperation with the Philippines? Finally, we also wanted to look a little bit at what role not just the U.S. can play, but also U.S. partners and allies such as Japan and the Republic of Korea in development in the Philippines. And so with that, I'm going to toss it to our first panelist here, Conor. Why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Harrison. And let me add my congratulations to Greg Polling and the team at CSIS for a great strategy forum so far. I feel like we were joking before, we're getting into this kind of like North Korea style or maybe even a Trump administration cabinet meeting style praise at this point. But this has been a really great discussion so far, and I look forward to the rest of it. So again, thanks for having me. I think this is as others have said, this is a really important question in particular around infrastructure. And, ultimately, I think we need to start with the premise, and I believe this, that it is in the U.S. strategic interest to invest in infrastructure development in the Philippines and other close partner countries. And I really do believe that it should be, and there is great opportunity here to place infrastructure through things like the Luzon Economic Corridor at the heart of U.S.-Philippine economic and strategic relations going forward. But it goes without saying that a lot has happened in the last 8 months. And so I want to kind of take my remarks in 3 parts. One, I want to look at where were we pre-January 2025. 2, where are we right now? And then 3, look ahead to where I think we need to go in the coming months and coming years around this important question. So the Biden administration launched what they called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, or PGI, at the beginning of the administration. And this was really seen as not just the US, but the G7 credible counteroffer to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And to be clear, PGI was by no means perfect. It was by no means without fault. As someone who sat at USAID and helped lead that agency's engagement on PGI, I can give you chapter and verse on where I think things could have been improved. But by the end of the administration, there had actually been a fair amount of progress made in terms of developing what PGI meant. The economic corridor approach in particular, I think, showed a lot of promise. The corridors were really an organizing principle whereby you would have investment in a central sort of transportation infrastructure investment, and then layer around that investments in other sectors that would help generate broader economic growth and take advantage of this investment in transportation infrastructure. You saw that there were 3 corridors really by the end of the administration that were being focused on. One was the Lobito corridor in southern Africa. The other one was, of course, the Luzon Economic Corridor here in the Philippines. And then the third was the Middle Corridor, or Trans-Caspian Corridor in Central Asia. From a practical perspective, the corridors also, I think, allowed for, from a U.S. government perspective, a coordinating mechanism for the interagency to come around how individual agencies could support different projects that would lead to the overall development of the corridors. It also was a way in which the U.S. government could engage and recognize that if you're going to offer a credible counter to BRI, the U.S. government was not going to do it on its own. It needed support from G7 partners. And so this was a real effort to bring them in to this corridor development and sort of look at where different projects aligned or didn't align with the interests of different G7 countries and other allies as well. And then finally, it really offered a route for partner country buy-in. And I think this has often gotten overlooked a little bit, but the administration and other G7 partners really worked to get partner countries like the Philippines or other countries in the corridors to buy in and support the development, to help identify projects, to help identify priorities with them, to identify potential bottlenecks and the solutions to those bottlenecks. So by January, the US government really had begun to allocate some funds. It wasn't a lot, but there were financial resources that had been identified to support the development of these corridors. In Luzon, you saw the announcement last April around the trilateral summit between the US, Japan, and the Philippines of a commitment from the US around about $15 million that was going to support some various projects within the corridor itself. Where are we now, though? And, others have alluded to what's happened with USAID and with U.S. foreign assistance in general, and I certainly don't want to recount everything that's happened over the last 8 months, but the challenge that we now have is there are significant gaps within the U.S. government in terms of its capabilities and toolkits to positively advance these corridors, including the Luzon corridor. So I see sort of 3 or 4 main challenges that the U.S. government now faces. The first is, with the loss of USAID, you've really lost the primary tool to help shape the broader enabling environment to attract private investment into infrastructure. There isn't a clear successor to what AID could do, and this is everything. This is like business and investment climate reform work, policy reform work. And so the State Department is at a real disadvantage right now because they've not just have you lost what USAID was doing from a material perspective, you've also lost key technical expertise, both in Washington and in the field. In Washington, USAID had an office that was dedicated to infrastructure. It was staffed with engineers who could provide technical expertise and technical guidance. There is no equivalent at the State Department. In the field, you've lost USAID's mission presence. And not just the FSOs and other U.S. direct hires, but our foreign service nationals. And so here in the Philippines, our mission had a fantastic cadre of FSNs, local Filipinos, who brought a wealth of knowledge about the Philippines from a development perspective. Just one very brief anecdote. When we were first talking about the Luzon Economic Corridor, one of our FSNs, we were going through some of the projects that had been identified, and one of our FSNs said, "Oh, that project, that's been around since the Ramos administration." Don't know when Ramos was president of the Philippines. I'm not an expert. I looked it up. It was in the early 1990s. The point is just that it was the kind of check that I think folks need sometimes, and that expertise is largely gone, and it's not clear how it's going to be replaced. The final point, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, but and others have alluded to it, but it's broader uncertainty around U.S. international economic policy. And I certainly don't want to steal the thunder of the excellent trade panel that's coming up, but we've placed tariffs on countries like the Philippines, like Angola or Zambia, and other African countries that it's really undermining the idea that the U.S. is going to be a partner from both an economic and strategic perspective because they have no idea what we're actually going to do. Our tariff policy continues to shift. But at the same time, we're saying we need your critical minerals, or we want your partnership on semiconductor development, but we're going to tariff the rest of your economy. And that really undermines our ability to meet our commitments around things like PGI or whatever this administration might want to call it. And then finally, I think a note of caution. And I mentioned the gaps. And I think there is this predilection in Washington right now to say, well, yes, it's bad that AID is gone, but we have these other tools like the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC. And I helped a lot of the work that I did at one point at CSIS fed into what became DFC, and everyone in Washington claims they're the father of DFC, so I'm not going to do that right now. But there is always this sort of impulse to say, well, DFC can do it. And DFC is a great agency, and I have friends who work there, but it is fundamentally a financial agency. It is about mobilizing private capital. It cannot do the policy reform that AID did. And so it's not a substitute at all for the work that aid has done. This is a good segue, though, to think about what's next. And again, I don't want to be overly pessimistic because it's very easy to fall into that trap given everything that's happened. I am cautiously optimistic about the moment, and that's because I do think that if you take what the administration has said is their stated foreign policy of a stronger, safer, more prosperous America, which to me seems like it is the core of American foreign policy and has been for many years. things like infrastructure development in the Philippines, support for supply chain resilience, critical minerals, semiconductor industry, that aligns well with what the administration says they're trying to achieve. But they need to do more than just tear things down. We need to know what they stand for, and they need to take some constructive steps to ensure that they can actually achieve these goals. First, they need to make a clear commitment to the existing corridors, and I think they need to develop a strategic plan to advance them. And I think they've already begun to make some good, noises around this. Secretary Rubio was here in July, redoubled the commitment to the Luzon Economic Corridor, said we're going to put $15 million into it. It's still not clear exactly what that money is going to be spent on or how that money is going to be spent. But regardless, publicly they are saying they like these ideas. And so I do think there's good groundwork there. But second, state really needs to build the capacity to fill the gaps that were left by USAID's dismantling. As I said before, DFC and the other development agencies, whether it's Trade and Development or MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, they're insufficient. They're not going to get you what you need if you're really going to advance things like the Luzon Economic Corridor. You need that full suite. And so state really needs to look at building the expertise they need and having the right people in the room who have the right technical skills, both in Washington and here in the Philippines. It was great to hear our ambassador say that there is going to be some kind of a team here in Manila, but I can guarantee you it is still going to be significantly smaller than what the mission was in January. And it's not going to have that full suite of expertise that the mission had. And then the second point at state is they really need to ensure that they have the actual mechanisms that can spend the money. Again, I applaud the ambassador for highlighting that we're going to provide the Philippines with $63 million. How are you going to spend that money? We've canceled 83% of USAID's grant and contract mechanisms. Most of the assistance that the State Department was responsible for prior to January 2025 was spent through USAID mechanisms. So they have to ensure that they have something to spend that money. Finally, I think the administration really needs to think about what their offer is. Again, are we saying that we're going to invest in infrastructure in countries like the Philippines primarily because we are then going to use it for extractive purposes, meaning we'll take critical minerals out or other things? But the corridor approach originally is appealing because it is about layering other investments, whether it's in agriculture, semiconductor industry, or other things like that, that's enabling a broader economic growth by tapping infrastructure investments. My argument would be is this can be a win-win. The U.S. gets diversified supply chains, we get access to the minerals that we need, but at the same time, a country like the Philippines can also access broader economic development from this infrastructure investment. And I think this is the critical difference. We have criticized the Chinese government for at least the last 15 years over its approach on Belt and Road by saying it's primarily an extractive approach. Yes, you're giving countries the money they need for infrastructure, but you're taking preferential deals on oil and gas or other minerals, or you're saddling countries with unsustainable debt levels. It would be hypocritical if we then just simply adopt that same approach. And it's not that I don't think, this administration has signaled that they want a more transactional approach to foreign assistance. That's fine. But they need to hone that message, and I think they need to really think about putting it in terms of this can be a win-win. Yes, the U.S. can have a return on investment. Yes, we can get the things that we want, but we are also going to continue to try to deliver clear economic and development benefits for the countries that we're investing in. I'll stop there. I look forward to the questions and from hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you, Conor, for a very sobering breakdown of the state of affairs in the U.S. Hank, why don't we go to you?
Thank you, Harrison. And thank you again to CSIS and Greg and Japhet, wherever you are, for helping. Thanks for bringing this discussion about the Philippines to the Philippines. It's important. It's an important step for an organization from Washington, D.C. Thanks, too, for bringing together our friends from the Philippines and the United States, and particularly in our case, our co-chairs of the U.S.-Philippines Society together, and to bring in the international audience, which is so critical to success in some of the areas we're talking about, and Conor was talking about infrastructure in particular. So welcome all. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you. Infrastructure is the foundational grid that keeps people and products on the move, enables us to communicate with neighbors and across the globe, sustains educational systems, delivers energy, and protects human health, national security, and the environment. In simplest terms, infrastructure can help speed us through synchronized traffic lights, while faulty infrastructure inevitably leads to gridlock. In short, a well-ordered society rests on a responsive foundation of broad and overlapping networks of physical, technical, and social infrastructure. As a result of its demography and geography, the Philippines' infrastructure needs are shaped by factors including rapid urbanization, demands of a younger population eyeing mobility into an energy-consuming middle-class lifestyle with cars, home appliances, and air conditioning, the expectations of a business community serving domestic and international markets, and increased vulnerability to climate change and natural disasters. Philippine infrastructure requirements and priorities today are being addressed by national government policies and programs, together with robust input from the private sector and drawing on international financing and expertise. Philippine infrastructure spending in the past decade has improved from 3% to 5%. However, actual construction of flagship projects has lagged owing to a restricted level of activity during the COVID years, land acquisition challenges, and environmental concerns. As a member of the U.S.-Philippine Society, I would note that the role of the United States in helping to develop both physical and institutional infrastructure in the Philippines going back to the beginning of the last century. Thomasite teachers, who, as Kate Baker has written, came to the Philippines in 1901, fortified with energy and passion, laid the groundwork for a nationwide system of public education, and established a lasting legacy. At the same time, Governor General William Howard Taft worked with Filipino counterparts to build systems of modern governance, along with the roads and ports that would stimulate the economic growth that transformed Manila into a thriving Pearl of the Orient during the pre-war years. This panel was asked to assess the outlook for development assistance in the Philippines in the absence of a U.S. Agency for International Development. I appreciate what Conor had to say on that. I look forward to responses from others on this panel. But it would seem useful to cite a few examples of the role of USAID over the past years as we assess post-USAID development prospects. Following the end of World War II, American assistance helped to strengthen Philippine infrastructure in a variety of ways. As Butch Miley, I think he's here, president of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, wrote recently in Fortune magazine, USAID, by any measure, has done an absolutely yeoman job feeding the hungry, combating infectious diseases, promoting economic development, and fighting poverty. After the ravages of the war, USAID helped establish national government agencies and educational institutions, later focusing on strengthening democratic institutions. In more recent times, USAID provided ex-combatants in the southern Philippines with skills training so they could reintegrate into society. In the wake of Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, USAID rebuilt schools, clinics, and water systems that enabled local businesses to get back on their feet. At the same time, it embarked on programs to strengthen the economies of cities outside of Manila to promote sustainable regional growth. USAID's post-World War II legacy will stand for itself, and I suspect be judged by people here in positive terms. More recent USAID assistance in areas of disaster preparedness and response can and will be supported, if not fully replaced, by international aid groups and multilateral institutions, along with improved national government capabilities and the private sector cooperation from organizations like PDRF and logistical assistance from the U.S. military. For example, and I think Ambassador MaryKay mentioned this, just last month, the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command dispatched Marine and Air Force planes to deliver life-saving relief items to flooded communities in northern Luzon, which were hit by consecutive southwest monsoon storms. Programs to reintegrate former Moro guerrilla fighters remain important as a means of restoring peace in the South, especially with the BARM elections looming in October. We hope that the government here can sustain reintegration programs in the absence of USAID and the highly effective work on reconciliation carried out by the U.S. Institute of Peace. Today, even in the absence of USAID programs, America remains engaged in supporting infrastructure development in the Philippines. We've talked a bit today about the Luzon Economic Corridor, and clearly it's a signature example of what we're talking about, where the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, in this case, is partnering with the Philippine Department of Transportation to provide technical expertise related to transportation modeling, port integration analysis, and legal and institutional planning. The Luzon Economic Corridor connects Subic, Clark, Manila, and Batangas with improved road, rail, and port facilities, speeding the flow of goods and spurring economic growth along the way in a vital area of the Philippines' heartland. On a separate but related track, expansion of the Clark Airport will relieve congestion at NAIA, and public-private partnership investments at New Clark City will attract business operations beyond Metro Manila. Of course, needs for improvements in infrastructure range far beyond central Luzon. The Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao is arguably the neediest region in the country as a result of a difficult history and decades of conflict. If the October 13th BARM election is accompanied by strides toward peace and reconciliation, we may see a dividend, opening the way for infrastructure improvements in communications and transportation, together with business development and business investment and agricultural development in the region. Progress toward peace and reconciliation in the South will allow the AFP, which now deploys some 40% of its troops to Mindanao, Sulu, to pivot toward territorial defense requirements and at the same time contribute to a stabilized national security environment that will further underpin international investor confidence in the Philippines. On the other hand, if the BARM election results fail to promote unity and serves only to reinforce rivalries and communal tensions in the South, then the progress toward that pivot, unfortunately, will be delayed. Other areas that impact investor confidence, and more importantly, the lives of the Filipino people, include: one, effective disaster response and preparedness to ensure continuity of commercial operations and more time on the job for workers; two, ensuring energy supplies to meet the needs of consumers and businesses; three, improving health initiatives to maintain a productive workforce; and four, expanding human resources to include promoting leadership opportunities for women and drawing on the expertise of returned OFWs, including seafarers. Keys for progress in each of these areas include public-private partnerships and community-based solutions, especially in disaster response and public health. And on the critical issues of energy availability, cost, sourcing, and distribution, solutions should include upgrading resilience to allow the electrical grid to snap back in the face of intensifying tropical storm patterns. As the Philippines addresses challenges in these areas, there is room for optimism. The widely recognized resilience of the Filipino people, the availability of a large and growing workforce, and the forward-looking competence of world-class business leaders, along with government policies under this administration and the previous administration to expand infrastructure solutions. The Philippines does have the capacity to forge meaningful progress on infrastructure development and gain comparative advantages as a regional partner for America and this dynamic and vital part of today's world. In closing, I would be remiss not to mention some of the contributions made by members of the U.S.-Philippine Society. The Ayala Corporation, for example, support for public-private partnerships has led to improvements in public health. We've talked about some of the specific areas where that's taken place, and it's a very impressive story. Partnership with the Philippine Transmarine Carriers under the Smart Development Initiative has mobilized OFWs to deploy skills in dealing with natural disasters and has provided Wi-Fi to a number of elementary and middle schools in central Luzon. Plan 8 Management has introduced expertise in new technologies designed to improve accuracy in forecasting and modeling to enhance protections for infrastructure along the coast in the face of climate change. And the Society's support in the wake of Typhoon Haiyan helped kickstart the Washington, D.C.-based Philippine Humanitarian Coalition, which over the past decade has developed and financed projects to improve the lives of deserving Filipinos here in this country at the local level. So thank you for your attention and for your interest in some of the activities of the U.S.-Philippine Society. Harrison.
Terrific. Thank you, Hank. Adoracion, please.
Thank you, Harrison, and thank you once again, Gregory, for inviting me here. And I'm glad to see familiar faces, people I met from the last strategic exercise that we had on energy sector cooperation. Before I answer Harrison's question, I would like to emphasize 2 points. The first one is something that it's an important lesson that we learned during the energy sector cooperation exercise. Is there subnational representation here? Are there representatives, say, from the League of Cities of the Philippines, League of Provinces? None? ULAP, Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines? ULAP? There's none. Harrison, Gregory, we have no subnational representation here. We emphasize that repeatedly every time we have an exercise on U.S.-Philippines cooperation. So it's something that's very important. I think the next time we hold something like this, we ensure that there's subnational representation. Another point that I would like to emphasize before I go to Harrison's question is the importance of engaging the communities and ensuring that the needs of our people and the impacts on them of future projects in U.S.-Philippine cooperation in infrastructure are taken into account. And we can do that if we include in setting the context the state of the Philippine infrastructure at present. And it's a sad state. So when we look at road density, the National Capital Region, road density is more than 64 times that of the density in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. If we are to look at road roughness index, which is rated between 1 to 7, the Cordillera region, the BARM, or the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao is nearing 7, which is the worst in the scale. And even in the National Capital Region, in Metro Manila, it's close to 5. if we are to look at the energy sector, what are the inadequacies? Something very felt by ordinary Filipinos. System average interruption in power. How many times? It's 46 times annually on the average. And how long is the duration? 7,000 plus minutes. And then we have the second highest price of electricity in the ASEAN region. If we are to look at the railroad density, we have the lowest among the ASEAN countries. So if we are to properly set the context for Philippine-US cooperation in infrastructure, we need to consider this. We need to look at the needs of our people and the impacts of the projects that could be part of the pipeline, the impacts on our people. And doing that, I think, will reduce unnecessary friction from, even from the negotiation stage to financial close and even during implementation. So I think we should not lose sight of that. So aside from setting the geopolitical context, aside from considering the strategic interests of US and Filipino firms. Now on to the question of Harrison. I have a short list here on possible opportunities for Philippine-US cooperation. I heard that the Luzon Economic Corridor was mentioned a few times already, so that's part of my short list. So logistics and industrial corridors. And in this area, the Luzon Economic Corridor can serve as the anchor. Then there are also possible opportunities in power and grid infrastructure. And this can serve to de-risk manufacturing for scaling up of manufacturing. And then digital and data infrastructure. Semiconductors also as the flywheel for demand. Critical minerals and batteries for backward integration for energy. Then water, wastewater, and industrial utilities as manufacturing enablers. And construction inputs and advanced manufacturing. For energy sector cooperation, because that's my area of research at the government think tank, Philippine Institute for Development Studies, the possible areas are, and this is for industrial power and inclusive and affordable energy access. So for the industries and for the communities. The possible areas of cooperation are securing reliable transitional fuel, and that is liquefied natural gas, and then ensuring resilient grids. Also, rapid scale-up of variable renewables and storage, and then emergent clean fuels, green hydrogen, and derivative ammonia. And by the way, the Department of Energy has already issued a framework for green hydrogen investments, and possibly nuclear. So the 123 agreement with the US is now in place. And these areas of investment could be back finance, project preparation, and technical assistance. From where? Possibly US Development Finance Corporation or DFC, US Export-Import Bank, and US Trade and Development Agency, who which I heard had already set up office here in the Philippines. No? So I agree with Conor when you said that there's no replacement for US aid. But there's no replacement as an entity. But in terms of ecosystem, the existing ones can be seen as the replacement. And then the skilled workers of the USA, the skilled developmental workers are still there, and they can be tapped to, help in the new areas where the DFC, the EXIM, and the USTDA will enter into. And possibly if subnational entities can be engaged, especially now that we've recently enacted the PPP code and the local government unit participation of in public-private partnerships is now clearer, because previously they operate under various guidelines, so the legal framework is sort of fragmented. Now there are clearer guidelines for the subnational entities in participating in public-private partnerships. So that's something that the DFC, US EXIM, and USTDA can study very well. And then on to what's your third question again? Sorry. So the role of USA, ROK and Japan, yeah. Well, we recently ratified, well, that's not so recent, that was last year. The Senate ratified the free trade agreement with the Republic of Korea, and then it entered into force after Korea signing last December. So that's a promising area. And Japan, definitely, JICA will be a very important partner. JICA is the largest ODA source of the Philippines, and they're well entrenched in many infrastructure sectors in the Philippines. So that is promising. US, Philippines, ROK, and Japan cooperation in infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Adoracion. Dindo, let's
Thank you, Arson. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Greg, and to the CSIS team. We all thank you. I think every speaker does. But I'd also like to thank the supporter of this program, ICTSI, for helping us have this inaugural Manila Strategy Forum. I will divert from what has been mentioned, and I would start by quoting my column tomorrow in the business world. And I had said, in an era marked by intensifying geo-economic confrontation, investment in modern transport system, energy facilities, digital networks, and climate-resilient structures is not only a development imperative, but a national security priority. I'd like to build on this idea, because as we have discussed, it was mentioned earlier by the previous panel, the Luzon corridor, quite exciting for Filipinos here. I would have wanted to show a map that's basically the city of Batangas up to the port of Subic, which is basically what we call in the Philippines Mega Manila, that drives the Philippine economy. Imagine investing in infrastructure, and it's being driven by a trilateral agreement from the United States and the Philippines and Japan. And you even add the support that it got from one of the communique of the G7 countries. But something has been happening in this area, and that's what I want to cite. And it would be nice to see slides on this. I speak of railway project funded by Japan. We call it the North-South Commuter Railway System, partnership with the Aviation Development Bank. The US, I think, just committed this year under the Trump government technical assistance support for the construction of a Subic-Clark-Manila-Batangas railway for cargo to connect the ports of Batangas and the port of Subic. Something that another partner of the Philippines, Korea, is funding is the Laguna Lakeshore Road Network Development. For some of us, what we call the Laguna Dibay. Building a road network there that connects that dynamic part of southern Tagalog in the Philippines, that will connect Metro Manila, Laguna, Rizal, Cavite, and Batangas. But of course, when we speak of connectivity, ports are very important. Exactly in a place called Bawan, Batangas, adjacent to the city of Batangas, the private sector is modernizing or expanding a port called the Luzon International Container Terminal that will become the second biggest port after the port of Manila. So you see the private sector stepping up in terms of modernization. Imagine building a logistic hub even beside that area, how it can contribute to economic growth. And when you look at Subic, for example, the ICTSI Subic port can provide, or the Subic-based Freeport Zone, the Internal Terminal 1 and 2, that can help support investments, creation of logistical support for investment in Central Luzon in our country. We've heard from the former DOTR, or Transportation Secretary, recently, Department of Public Works, talking about public-private partnership in airports to push for tourism. The reason I'm emphasizing this, the private sector has stepped up in this country. And we have long argued that. Even in the water space, water security, this one is something that I'd like to share to everyone. There was a Belt and Road Initiative by China called Kaliwa Dam that violated almost every law in our country, fast-tracked by a previous government, to provide water for the western side of Metro Manila. But along the way, we saw a private sector called Prime Infrastructure stepping up, saying, we can do it as a private sector at no cost to government. And it's called the Wawa Dam. And we saw that contrast. We could have been indebted. We could have experienced economic coercion. But it took a private sector to step up. And now I think it's ready to support the eastern part of Metro Manila. In terms of energy security, we can speak of the Malampaya Deep Water Gas to Power project. Our friends from the US left us, Chevron. And we had this deep conversation at the time with then Ambassador Sung Kim. He said, that's the private sector who steps up, the Philippine private sector, and takes over and tries to drill oil again. We're hoping that it allows also the private sector, both US and Filipino consortiums, to look into South Sulu Sea or even the Recto Bank for natural gas to ensure energy security in the Philippines. Or even in terms of solar, the so-called M-Terra solar project, projected to be the world's largest solar and battery storage facility, an initiative by the Meralco group of companies. As we try to push energy diversification, as we try to push transition, even the offshore project by our dear co-chairman, Jaime Aguso is here, with Denmark on some offshore wind. These are all happening in the country right now. Do we need aid? Not really, but we need maybe investors. We need the private sector to believe in the Philippines, just like the Philippine private sector believes in the Philippines and have invested. Even in the space of data centers or digital services. When you look at the Philippines, you see submarine cables passing through our archipelago. And it reflects an opportunity for us to harness this capacity on digital services. And we see again subsidiaries of Globe, and then the former co-chairman of the U.S.-Philippine Society, Manny Pangilinan, the data centers they have built within this Luzon economic corridor that can help justify more investment in the business process outsourcing or the data center. So a lot of things are happening in country right now. And this type of forum can enlighten strategic thinkers to look at the private sector. I've always long argued for the strategic collaboration between the private sector, the government, and even the international community that can help us mitigate challenges of the geo-economic sphere facing the Philippines. There was a government previous to today that saw China as the savior. You know, that's my favorite country up north. And after 6 years, 0.9% of our investment came from China. All hype, no substance. That's according to government data. And who stepped up? Private sector and real friends of the Philippines. Korea, Japan, stepped up on OBDA during this time. So I would like to end by saying critical infrastructure in all its many forms, is the backbone of long-term economic growth, as well as national resilience. Achieving our country's lofty aims will entail close strategic collaboration, both with the private sector and with international allies. Whatever other issues may come up, the government, with its partners, the private sector, and the international community, must not lose focus. And strategically, as we collaborate, we can achieve more for the Philippines and its allies, its friends, and partners. Thank you, Harrison.
Thank you, Dindo, and really thank you to our panel for outlining the broad range of infrastructure achievements, historically, sectors that are priorities today, and the many different actors that are contributing to achievements across the board. I wanted to start the Q&A section with a question of my own to really refocus this back on the strategic picture here. When you look at infrastructure, and I want to start, maybe we can go in reverse. For the Philippines, what are the strategic infrastructure priorities? What are the critical sectors or projects or initiatives that are at the top of the list when it comes to strategic autonomy and national security? And if we continue that down, I'm curious, do those priorities align with the Trump administration's priorities, perhaps, in infrastructure development? We talked a little bit about, Conor talked specifically about maybe the transactional nature of the Trump administration and interest in developing critical minerals and specific elements. I wonder, what are the Philippines' strategic priorities, and then is there overlap with what the Trump administration might be most interested in developing?
Of course, an overlap could be in terms of connectivity. When you look at ports, you look at our railways that should be improved, and even tie it up to the mineral or the mining sector, critical minerals. And by the way, we just passed a law that defines a fiscal regime for the mining sector, so we can expect more extraction for critical minerals in this country. So we need to see all these initiatives by government now that I think has been key or part of the discussion points of our own government as they visit the United States and as they continue to discuss. And if only we can have more participation from private sector of the United States, if this project that connects the Luzon corridor from end to end, north to south, that the U.S. is spending, as they have announced just this June, these are important physical connectivity. But on one hand also is the challenge of the Philippines, as Dr. Navarro said earlier, energy is always a problem. How can we protect ourselves if we will not invest on our own energy security? And we need more energy infrastructure, energy investment in that space, especially in exploring maybe natural gas, generating more participation in the offshore field or solar investments. So these are what I believe could be key areas where we can grow investments and partnership with the United States.
Very good question, Harrison. So you're asking us to pick. I'm picking also energy sector as a very critical sector. And whether it aligns with the Trump administration's priorities, that's difficult to answer. But I guess the way to enhance alignment is to look at the forward and backward linkages that are possible for U.S. firms when you look at the investment opportunities in the energy sector. So what are these possible investment opportunities? Grid infrastructure and power generation, especially using renewables. For grid infrastructure, backward linkages could be U.S. suppliers of turbines, transformers, grid software, and LNG or natural gas infrastructure. And for forward linkages, perhaps, reliable, low carbon power technologies for our semiconductor assembly and testing facilities, which, by the way, number 213. So we have 13 semiconductor assembling and testing facilities in the country. And then also perhaps rail electrification as part of the power infrastructure. And I mentioned semiconductors, and this is something that is going to be important in the clean energy transition. And we can tie that up with the ongoing attempt to link critical minerals processing with energy infrastructure, especially in electric vehicles and other aspects of the green or clean energy transition. And backward and forward linkages also exist for U.S. firms, no? For critical and minerals and batteries, there could be opportunities for U.S. firms in traceability systems, in for forward linkages, battery pack assemblers and storage support. And I guess because there's this recent problem that the Philippines encountered. One major nickel processing plant, that's Nickel Asia, recently closed. But that provides an important opportunity for U.S. firms because the priority, the direction is not changing. We still aim to develop the supply chain for critical minerals processing. So despite the exit of Nickel Asia, the direction is still the same. And I think that exit provides opportunities for potential entry of U.S. firms. Thank you.
I just mentioned quickly the fact that when you talk about infrastructure needs here and then how they can be addressed, the realities of the vulnerability of the Philippines in terms of natural disasters and the growing population. And so I would say natural disaster preparedness and response are really key priorities for the Philippines. And to the extent that the U.S. could find ways to work with the Philippines, whether it's in the private sector through PDRF or directly with the government, that's an area that we can look at. And the obvious point to make now is with the expansion of the EDCA bases, I think both sides were very smart to incorporate disaster response into the various elements that went into those provisions. And it puts the U.S. in a position to respond as a first responder, and on the one hand, but also in building up the EDCA sites to build in infrastructures that can withstand some of the tropical storms we've seen. And there is a commitment we've seen from the Indo-Pacific Command to be willing to do that sort of thing and to engage in it and to engage that as part of the agenda in the defense discussions with the Philippines.
I think folks have done a good job of highlighting where the priorities are, whether it's ports or the opportunities around potentially nickel mining and processing. I think I'll just briefly add on this. I think you have to look at where, if you're thinking about where there is alignment with the Trump administration's priorities, it's really going to be about where can American business get involved. And I think this goes a little bit to its more transactional approach. And so at its core, I think if there is an opportunity like the Cerebus, we've talked a lot about the investment in Subic Bay, if there are potentials to replicate that, I think the administration is going to be very interested in how you do that. I think the challenge that you have is there is not always a natural U.S. business partner. There isn't always an American business that looks and says, I want to invest in that. They see too much downside risk. This is where DFC could come in, or XM, or some of the others, but that's going to be a central challenge, I think, as we kind of look at where the priorities are here and where you can get the overlap from the Trump administration going forward. Thanks.
All right. Well, why don't we open things up to the audience? If you have a question, please raise your hand, and the microphone should come to you. We have over here.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm Major Rimas from National Defense College of the Philippines. My question is, China's statecraft involves Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, and Global Civilization Initiative, under which Global Civilization Initiative is the TikTok and WeChat. My question is, the US banned TikTok and WeChat in US military and government offices. Do you recommend to the Philippines that we also do the same? Thank you.
Any thoughts?
Is the question whether the Philippines should buy TikTok?
Should ban. Should
ban.
use
I'm sorry, I didn't
government.
hear that. Thank you. I mean, look, I'm a Luddite. I've never actually used TikTok in my entire life. All I know is that there's videos that float around out there on it. I mean, all I would say is I think there are some obviously pernicious angles to TikTok, WeChat, and the others. It's a decision that the Filipino government's going to have to make on it by itself. I think if you actually look at what the Trump administration is doing right now around TikTok, it's actually quite schizophrenic. We're going to buy it. No, we're not going to buy it. We're going to ban it. No, we're not going to ban it. So I wouldn't necessarily follow their policy when it comes to TikTok at this point.
Yeah, I think when you look at this brands, TikTok, WeChat, WeChat is not really a player in the Philippines, but TikTok is a far third in the Philippines, quite far compared to Facebook, YouTube. But Filipinos should realize that China, the state of People's Republic of China, operates differently. That they can, and for those who understand how technology works today, it goes through a data center. So our TikTok post, and I used to tell my nieces and nephews, now it's in Beijing. You like posting, so now you have contributed in that database. So that's something that really should flag us all. The idea of whatever we share gets routed to a certain data center. And for government of the Philippines, for the military, for the public officers, that's quite dangerous. And that, I feel, is where the danger is. WeChat, it used to be used only by online gaming operations of Chinese companies here in the Philippines. We have barely seen it being used, or maybe even by some companies dealing with China. But TikTok is really where the danger is in the country.
All right. Other questions? We have one in the front over here.
Right, hi, thank you very much. I'm Wyron Bernard. I'm from the Office of the Youth in Maritime. I'm just going to build up on the question of, hence I think asked a while ago regarding the overlap of the current Trump administration and the priorities for the Philippines. Now, off the top of my head, because we've been discussing about port modernization and as well as renewable energies, I thought, why is it not anyone discussing about maritime decarbonization? It could actually be the nexus between the renewable sector that we've been discussing and as well as with port modernization. Now, there has been very much interest regarding the private sector. Now, I need to pick the brain of the panel as to any practical way we can encourage private sector to invest in infrastructures. In our studies, we've known that there is a need to risk investments and as well as policy changes to encourage fiscal incentives for ship owners, for port operators to decarbonize the maritime industry. any more that you can think to entice investors? Thank you very much.
Maritime investment incentives?
Yeah, I think incentives are there under the Domestic Shipping Modernization Act for the maritime sector. And given the current efforts to really define our maritime boundaries and ensure that laws protecting our territorial and economic rights are protected, I think opportunities will be opened up. But you're correct in raising this point that public-private sector collaboration will be needed. In the public sector, the Development Bank of the Philippines is the most active financing institution, so that's the potential partner of U.S. firms that might want to go into this subsector. Thank you.
All right. Other questions? See one in the corner here.
Hello, good afternoon. I am Ashley Solen from the French Chamber, and my question would be directed to Ms. Navarro from PIDS. My question would be, how do we ensure the just transition into the renewable sector, given that the transition into newer forms of energy would, for one, somehow entail the displacement of communities when you would need to install solar panels? And on top of this, I would like to know, how well are we faring in terms of seeking the partnership of private sector in investing into renewable energy infrastructure in the Philippines?
A very important question, Manuel. Let's look at the impacts on communities and their engagement as partners. Well, there is a policy called ER1-94, which gives benefits to host communities for power sector projects, and that includes renewable energy projects. And we also recently enacted the Microgrid Systems Act, which, by the way, can also help industrial clusters. You know, if microgrids business opportunities can be found in islands which are not yet connected to the main grid, then embedded generation through the microgrid systems law can be pursued. So we have that ER1-94 policy for host communities, and the microgrid systems law also has policies that aim to provide benefits to communities, and that's first and foremost through direct connection and through maximization of local inputs. And by the way, maximizing localization of inputs can also be a good strategy for U.S. firms to minimize pushback at the subnational level. Thank you.
All right. In the back corner there.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. From the Philippine Coast Guard, allow us to thank you for all the investment opportunities that you propose. But our concern is security, particularly on matters not only of cybercrime, but also tangible and intangible intrusion into the country and out of the country embedded in your proposal. And if so, how big is security and law enforcement part of your proposal for new investment opportunities for the country? Thank you, sir.
Dindo, any thoughts?
Of course, that's not the topic of this panel. But, again, the private sector continues to play a role if we speak of cybersecurity, because you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are technology companies that can be harnessed, and maybe with governments and its own initiatives in the cyberspace, needs to engage with them. Or we can even take a look at what I call cyber diplomacy, work with like-minded countries who has that capacity, and provide support for the needs of the Coast Guard, the needs of our defense and security sector. No? And not only in the maritime space, but even in the air defense space. So this is where I believe if only our own government, with its own initiatives, with its own priorities, lines up these initiatives and try to work with private sector or work with like-minded countries, and from there, that kind of partnership can address the needs of our different agencies and the so-called security sector apparatus in the country.
Okay.
Very true, Dindo. May I add, Harrison?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, because I would like to also sort of align his sentiment with our topic on infrastructure, because earlier he said, so we're talking about infrastructure, but our concern is cybersecurity. But, you know, infrastructure investments in digital infrastructure, in ICT, is very much related to, or are very much related to your concern on cybersecurity. Because how can we enhance cybersecurity if the archipelago is not connected? If even the government agencies have connectivity issues, and in digital infrastructure and ICT area, there are possible investment opportunities also for U.S. firms with local Philippine partners. And I also look at possible backward and forward linkages. So U.S. vendors for cloud, chips, servers, cybersecurity, and perhaps subsea cable gear. And then for forward linkages in terms of smart logistics, e-government technologies, and trade facilitation, and workload management for semiconductors.
I won't speak too directly to cybersecurity, but I would just say on this question of sort of digital infrastructure, I actually think, you know, we talk a lot, we gravitate towards, when we say infrastructure, you know, transportation, roads, rails, but I do think throughout PGI and the US government's approach on this, digital infrastructure has been an important piece of this. I believe that the Trump administration will continue to look at how they can support this. And I do think there's a lot of good opportunity here in the Philippines as part of the Luzon corridor and as part of sort of the US-Philippines economic relationship, things like ICT and that area. I do think this is, again, one of those areas where I would highlight some of the loss that we get with AID and how state and others can pick this up, though, is there was a lot of work done on things like ORAN and, you know, the sort of policy environment for these things. It's not entirely clear to me how that piece is going to get picked up, and there was a lot of good work that AID had been doing here and elsewhere on some of those important issues. And so I do think it's another area, as we're talking about where the opportunities are. I think we have to really look at how you capture some of that expertise, bring it back, and ensure that we're still working on it. Because obviously, I think the Trump administration would agree that, you know, Huawei, ZTE, China's approach is not what they want to see. They would rather see U.S. and other Western businesses capture that kind of digital infrastructure going forward.
Just to add to that, Conor, you pointing out that both the administration here and the administration in Washington will have a common interest in cybersecurity. And their infrastructures to build on, separate from whatever AID was doing and all the good work they were doing, but their legal mechanisms. There's a cybersecurity working group is in place that involves law enforcement people, the legal attaché and the U.S. Embassy counterparts, and working closely with the private sector, which is particularly susceptible to penetration and loss, and that's a shared concern by both sides. So there's work to be done to expand and continue the work that is already out there and maybe beef it up a little more in the face of the growing cybersecurity threats.
All right. Question straight ahead of me in the back there, if we have a microphone.
Good afternoon. I'm Valerie Sampson from the Philippine Nuclear Research Institute. So the topic of panel 2 is essentially building the 21st century infrastructure. We've talked about building power plants, and I hope nuclear power plants, of course, semicon companies, batteries, critical minerals. And at the core of all this is people, right? We need to build the human resource capability of the country. And so my question is, what are the projects that the U.S. government is aiming together with the Philippines to promote the education sector? Because right now, our kids just would like to do TikTok and Messenger, and the functional literacy is going lower and lower. So we want to build all this very advanced technology, but if the people are not there, so the question is really, what are the projects that the U.S. and the government and the Philippine government are going to do on the education sector? Thank you.
Conor, can the U.S. government save the Philippine youth from TikTok?
Well, I suspect that we have the same problem in the United States, or at least it seems so. My kids aren't quite there yet. They're still too young for TikTok, thankfully, although my older one keeps asking when she's going to get a phone, and I keep saying 10 years from now. What I would say is that I think there is a lot of opportunity here, and this is again, I don't want to sound like a broken record and harp on what was lost, but human capacity development, human and training and VOTEC and things like that. That was an education in general. That was a significant area of investment for AID, for foreign assistance in general. And I do think that this is an area where, again, if you're thinking about the 21st century, the economy of the 21st century, ensuring that there's investment in these types of areas is necessary if you're actually going to compete in the 21st century. And there's a lot that the Filipino government can do on its own and should do on its own. But in a country like this, obviously a bilateral partner like the United States can help provide additional support, can help provide new avenues. I do think there's a lot of opportunity and there has traditionally been a lot of opportunity on the public-private partnership side in here. Corporations have traditionally seen a lot of areas where they need an educated local workforce. They need a trained local workforce. And so over the years, a number of U.S. multinational corporations have worked closely with AID, for example, in Angola, in Nigeria, and other countries to develop that trained workforce that can operate and meet the standards that the companies are being held to. So there is a lot that has been lost here. I think we do need to really look at how we kind of pull some of that back in. I will say, one of your questions, Harrison, was around opportunities for other partners. This is an area where obviously Japan, for example, JICA has done a tremendous amount in this sector over the years, in Southeast Asia, I believe in the Philippines as well. And so I think this is an area where you can also look at how partners are filling this in as well. I think, Japan, Korea in particular has a great story to tell, how they were once a recipient of aid and now they're now a donor, and they are trying, that this is an area around like technical skills building that they have done a lot of work. And so I think, if you look at like the Luzon Economic Corridor and how you could engage a partner like Korea, this is an area where you could really pull them in quite a bit.
Yeah, because she's coming from this perspective that we might be needing a lot of upgrading of a human resource, because she raised human resource when we already have investments on nuclear energy. I heard that you're from PNRI, Philippine Nuclear Research Institute. No? I believe that part of the roadmap in the Philippine-US cooperation is capacity building, workforce development. And I also noticed that the Fulbright Commission, which is representative here, is already participating in this area by sending scholars abroad to study supply chain issues and safety issues in nuclear. And I believe the local Filipino firms must also prepare for this. No? Identify domestic supply chain issues and check what kinds of workforce development will we need, and identify possible U.S. partners, no, in developing the domestic supply chain that can support nuclear power development. And then in your case, PNRI, no, so you're the current regulator in the domestic nuclear industry, which is currently focused on agriculture and health applications. No, you will seed the PhilAtom if the PhilAtom bill is enacted, the Philippine Atomic Energy Law, it's currently pending in Congress. No? So you're very much right to be concerned, and I guess your learning process should start now. Look at the very strict IAEA standards that are now in place, and how you could catch up. Thank you.
All right, we have just a few more minutes, maybe one last question. We have one up here.
Hi, I'm Robert Yames with the U.S.-Philippine Society. And there's been a lot of talks about the digital infrastructure, and I understand that. There's been talks about security. So what about AI? How do you implement it? Okay, and you got to understand how AI can be implemented, and there are many use cases that you can use it for. For example, privatize AI. That can be used to empower LGUs. Okay, wherein the collective knowledge is kept within the LGU. From a military perspective, you can do that too. There's a gentleman who talked about the Coast Guard, how you handle security. So my question is, what's the status of the AI infrastructure in the Philippines? And from that perspective, there's three major areas for AI infrastructure. High-speed processing, lots of storage, and high-speed communication.
And if I may add, energy. Energy supply, because AI use is very energy intensive. You're correct. That's something that should concern the Philippines. And by the way, on September 18, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies will hold a conference that will tackle AI. So it's the annual public policy conference, and our theme is reimagining governance in the age of AI. And as we prepare for that conference, we learned that the Philippines still lacks or still has insufficient data governance, and it's something that's very basic. So we have problems with ICT, digital connectivity, and then energy security, and now we better catch up with the private sector. At least the government has to catch up with the private sector in taking advantage of the opportunities being promised by AI. So we are tackling that, and we start by looking at use cases. Our Department of Education and our Department of Trade and Industry are looking at use cases that could be scaled up. And then our Department of Energy is trying to anticipate the energy demand that this will bring about. So we are preparing for that. But right now, what we are seeing mostly are problems, are challenges, while recognizing that there are really opportunities. So the promises are there, but the perils are here right now, and we have to deal with those.
I'll add my understanding based on conversations with American tech companies who have presence here, Microsoft, Oracle, Meta, even AWS, even Google. They have started in their partnership with different private and public agencies. They have been introducing the idea of using AI as part of the tools of their softwares. And I think the private sector is quite receptive to it. And so we can see its use moving forward. But one that is really upskilling its capacity and uses AI is one that helps drive the Philippine economy, the so-called IT, business process outsourcing industry. I spoke twice last year and middle of this year in their conference, and I decided to stay over the conference, and you see how AI is part of the conversation in this industry that contributes a lot to our economic growth. It's part of their upskilling of our own people, their own people, that helps them use this for their own businesses as they provide services to majority of American companies and even English-speaking countries. So we see this moving forward. And I think the challenge is, do we have the capacity to regulate the use of this? And we hope we see that balance, because if we regulate, it might stop the evolution and how we can really extract the values of AI in our day-to-day lives.
All right. Well, I'd like everyone to join me in thanking our panel here with a round of applause for an excellent discussion. We are going to go to a coffee break. Before we do, I have the duty to remind you that if you're joining us tomorrow, please be in the room before 7:45. The doors will close at 7:45 a.m. To ensure that security is in place for the President's speech tomorrow morning. So if you're coming tomorrow morning, be in here by 7:45. With that, we'll take 15 minutes for a coffee break, and we'll be back at 3:05 for our next panel.